They were brought to this death factory to die, but they came to fight. The hammers rang out, and the terrible order of Sobibor was broken. The Sobibor extermination camp was not a place for hope. It was a gigantic death factory that churned with the absolute precision of a German machine. Thick black smoke billowed endlessly from the chimneys, painting the sky a cold, despairing gray. Every day, thousands of innocent people were murdered. But in September 1943, when 20 Jewish prisoners of war, former Red Army soldiers, showed up, everything began to change. They did not come to bow their heads and wait to die. They came to fight. Pechersky and Weispapier quickly saw through the brutal truth of Sobibor and understood that action was needed. They understood that in this camp, everything was controlled. Every life was taken. Therefore, they knew that any act of resistance had to be calculated with absolute precision and care. A plan for an uprising was secretly formed underground, aimed squarely at the first target, the elimination of key SS officers, the brains that operated the camp's brutality. Siegfried Graetschus, the brutal Ukrainian guard commander, made an ideal opening target. Sobibor owed its existence to the complacency of its own Nazi rulers. Craftsman prisoners working exclusively for SS officers created opportunities for close contact, inadvertently opening the only loophole in the closed system. This is the single fatal weakness in the perfect system. In the silent sewing room, every action, even the stitching, is part of a tense strategy. They lured Graetschus with a new tailored coat. Finally, October 14th, 1943, was the day chosen. Every minute was a test of nerves. All the tailors stared out the window, holding their breath. They knew that a single mistake would not only ruin their plans, but also cause all the prisoners to bleed. The prisoner tried to appear calm, though his lips trembled. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared himself for the slightest mistake, and everyone would pay the price. Around 4 p.m., Graetschus entered the workshop as usual. He was caught off guard, immersed in his complacent power. The time had come. He stopped at the door and tried on his new coat. The click of his heels echoed. It was a decisive moment, a moment of power transfer. The calm Red Army soldier Arkady Weispapier sprang into action. He stepped behind the curtain, silently passing Graetschus to strike. All the remaining tailors' eyes were on his actions, but no one dared to breathe heavily. There was only the sound of sweat rolling down their temples. Weispapier spun, his axe crashing straight into Graetschus' head. He screamed in pain, but the blow was not strong enough to kill him outright. He staggered, and the order of Sobibor began to crumble. Immediately, Yehuda Lerner, the second soldier, rushed forward without hesitation. He brought the axe down again, splitting Graetschus' skull in two. The SS officer fell to the floor, dead before he hit the ground. Once the target was dead, the next move had to be lightning fast. Weispapier immediately pulled a P-38 pistol from his holster, the first weapon the prisoners had. He resolutely put the gun in the prisoner's shirt. This was not just a robbery, it was a declaration of power. It was the usurpation of the enemy's symbol. The tailors quickly dragged Graetschus' body away from the door and hid it under a pile of dirty clothes. Everything must be quiet. No one must notice his absence for at least the next hour. A guard was removed silently without a sound outside the factory. The silence in the room was heavier than the gunshots. Now that the prisoners were armed, they had a plan. The Colt P-38 pistol was hidden under the prisoner's clothes. His fingers lightly touched the handle of the gun. Now that the prisoners were armed, they had a plan. The Colt P-38 pistol was hidden under the prisoner's clothes. His fingers lightly touched the handle of the gun. They swore an oath. They would fight to the last drop of blood for freedom. Pechersky's clenched fist was a symbol of his iron resolve and silent oath. Every axe, every gun was now a promise. The prisoner's hand carefully wiped the last trace of blood from the axe blade, then quickly hid it under the wooden floor. The prison gate was about to open. The prisoner's hand carefully used a sharp object to loosen the latch, making a very small creaking sound. A small crack opened, letting in a cold light, signaling the start of the Sobibor Uprising. The first steps of freedom. They became ghosts of action in the heart of the factory of death. Their breath turned to white smoke in the cold air. The enemy's complacency was their greatest weapon. As the tired Ukrainian sentries dozed off on their watchtowers, letting their rifles slip from their hands, they knew their chance had come. The gates finally opened. The wire cutters bit into the metal with a resolute snap. A sharp swish echoed in the silence. The Sobibor Uprising had begun. Once the target was dead, the action had to be lightning fast. The prisoner soaked up the blood with rags and covered it with sawdust. He was absolutely certain that no one would notice his absence for at least the next hour. Weispapier immediately pulled out his P-38 pistol, along with his leather wallet and identification papers. He quickly hid the gun and papers in his old prisoner's clothes. The tailors quickly dragged Graetschus' cold body out the door, hiding him under a pile of old dirty clothes. Everything fell silent again, the silence in the room at that moment heavier than the gunshots. Now that the prisoners were armed, they had a plan. Pechersky winked decisively, signaling Weispapier. The assassination of Graetschus was the first shot. The enemy remained complacent, unaware that their commander had been eliminated. The terrifying order of Sobibor was about to be completely broken. An uprising, where the prisoners were no longer victims, but soldiers fighting for survival, was only a matter of time. The silhouettes of the prisoners quietly gathered at a meeting point. Pechersky signaled the direction of movement. Other SS officers also began to fall into the trap of complacency. SS officer Joseph Wolf entered the shoe factory, letting his guard down. The next target had been identified. Another SS officer was taken down quickly, silent as a shadow. The prisoner attacked with a skinning knife or axe and quickly snatched the P-38 from the officer's belt. More weapons, more hope. It was a ruthless war. The shiny key to the armory or the camp gate was taken from the dead SS, carefully placed in the prisoner's dirty palm. They needed everything to survive and escape. Time was both an enemy and an ally. The clock's hands moved past 5 p.m. A shot outside rang out faintly. Every minute that passed meant an SS life was taken. By about 5 p.m., a total of 11 SS officers had been silently and soundlessly taken down. New uniforms were stuffed into the trunk, completely covering the bodies, leaving only a black boot sticking out. From the deprivation, they had rifles, pistols, and grenades. The prisoner's hand quickly took a rifle, carabiner, 98K, and a box of ammunition from the locker, distributing them to his comrades. By about 5:30 p.m., the plan was complete. The German baseball grenades were carefully lifted from the mud and wiped clean. Pechersky's determined face reflected in the metal. Everything was ready.
5 p.m. Pechersky gave the order. Alexander Pechersky and Arkady Weispapier exchanged a final look. Pechersky raised his hand, signaling ready, then lowered it. Action broke out. They had to act quickly before the SS noticed their comrades' absence. Hammers rang out, clocks vibrated. The Sobibor Uprising had broken out. The signal rang out. Silence fell into chaos in an instant. Hundreds of prisoners stood up at once, boots clicking on the ground. Hundreds of people rose at once. Graetschus' pistol fired. Pechersky raised it high. The gun fired, muzzle flashing. Brass cartridges flew. The first shot of the uprising officially signaled war. They stormed the German arsenal. The prisoners used axes, picks, and shovels to smash into the wooden doors of the arsenal. The doors shattered, and wood flew everywhere. Although only a few training weapons remained, they were enough for a desperate fight. The captured guns were used. Prisoners fired their P-38s at the guard tower. The guards on the watchtower fell from their towers. The siege began to collapse. They tore through the barbed wire with everything they had. The prisoners' hands were cut, blood oozing out. Each cut was a step closer to freedom. The prisoners looked out through the newly created hole, out to the forest. The SS guards finally realized what was happening. They panicked, but quickly counterattacked. The battle to the death had begun, with rapid gunfire tearing through the night. Grenades were used to disable the trucks and reinforcements. The explosion tore through the night, signaling the end of Sobibor and chaos engulfing the entire camp. Pechersky led the charge, inspiring the men who had been victims. He ran fast, shouted loudly, jumped over the body of an SS guard. They became real soldiers. They searched for a way out. Prisoners pushed each other through the gaps in the fence. Many fell under German fire, but their will never broke. They fled into the Polish forest. More than 300 prisoners escaped from Sobibor that night. One fell, but was pulled up by another. The real battle had only just begun. After passing through the camp gates, they faced new fears, the cold Polish forest, and the enemy's pursuit. The prisoners' tattered shirts were caught in dry branches. Not everyone can carry a weapon. The rifle gets stuck and sinks in the mud. Becoming a target is inevitable. They walked for miles, trying to cover their tracks from the sniffer dogs. The icy stream was the only place they could hide. Pechersky stopped to wash the blood off his hands. When the Germans discovered the truth, Sobibor camp turned into a furious hell. SS officers kicked corpses and shouted slogans. They vowed to hunt down all escapees. It wasn't a gun, it was an axe. The SS men touched their axe wounds with their fingers. They recognized the prisoners as no longer victims but trained soldiers. In the forest, solidarity helped them survive. Pechersky carefully tore off a small piece of bread. They shared every piece of bread, every drop of water, fighting for each other's lives. The barking of police dogs and sirens echoed throughout the forest. The prisoner closed his eyes slightly, his jaw tensed, trying to listen for the footsteps of his pursuer. German and Ukrainian soldiers were in hot pursuit. The SS boots stepped straight into the prisoners' footprints.
What is
They were
this?
experienced hunters. With his military knowledge, Pechersky carefully opened the compass. The compass needle turned a few times and stopped pointing east. He led the group of survivors eastward, looking for the Soviet Red Army. Fear forced them to continue, but exhaustion was a more formidable enemy than the German soldiers. The exhausted prisoners rested on the high ground, Pechersky standing guard. Not everyone escaped. Those who were cornered were forced to fight. German baseball grenades fell to the ground. Explosions rang out, signaling a fight. Small groups were spotted and surrounded by German soldiers. Prisoners hid behind trees and returned fire with captured rifles. Each encounter was a life-or-death battle. The Nazis mobilized a large force, including ferocious police dogs, to hunt down the escapees. The dog barked fiercely, its eyes staring straight into the camera lens. For the unarmed, concealment was the only hope. The leaves trembled slightly with the prisoners breathing. They held their breath, listening for every footstep of their pursuer. The uprising shocked the SS apparatus. They could not accept the fact that the victims had won. The SS officer slammed his fist on the table and shouted orders for an immediate search. Internal reports recorded the deaths of 11 SS officers and several Ukrainian soldiers. This loss forced the Nazi authorities to close Sobibor permanently. Not all were so lucky. Two prisoners were shot by surprise. About 100 were recaptured or killed that first night. Blood mixed with mud. Knowing that it was too dangerous to go together, Pechersky decided to split the group into smaller units to increase their chances of survival. He and Weispapier exchanged a parting glance. They continued to fight as guerrillas. Each man carried what he could. Prisoners wrapped their most precious gold tooth in a dirty cloth. For many, the gold tooth was their only hope of survival in the outside world. For the survivors, the outside world was full of danger. Exhausted prisoners emerged from the bushes and encountered Polish peasants. They did not know whether they could trust the locals. Although hundreds were captured or killed in the manhunt, Sobibor was never able to operate again. The gate was destroyed forever. The SS cap was thrown in the mud, covered in mud. The Sobibor Uprising was the greatest prisoner victory of World War II, an indelible stain on SS history. The survivors' guerrilla war continued for weeks. German soldiers surrounded them in the dark woods. They were relentlessly hunted, but continued to fire back, with flashes of gunfire. Of the more than 300 who escaped, only about 50 survived until the end of the war. Captured prisoners were dragged from their beds, their faces covered in mud and blood. Most died under German gunfire. Pechersky and his group continued to fight in the forest for months. He tightened his grip on his P-38 and checked the magazine. They joined Polish and Soviet partisan units. Winter came, bringing cold and hunger. The prisoners' feet sank into the thick snow. Their breath turned to white smoke. The struggle for survival did not get any easier. To cover up their crimes, the Nazis leveled Sobibor, destroying the main buildings with picks and shovels. They tried to turn the place into a normal farm. They planted trees to hide their crimes. The roots of small pine trees clung to the ground where the crematorium had been. But the story of the uprising was written into history. Of all the Nazi extermination camps, only Sobibor saw a successful large-scale uprising. The stories of the soldiers who fought for survival have been told. Among the survivors, Pechersky became a symbol of courage and the triumph of human will. He looked straight into the camera. He had fulfilled his oath.